Good morning, I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. In today's update, the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine is facing another setback. The FDA has stopped all production of the vaccine at the Emergent Biosolutions plant in Baltimore after a new inspection. The inspection comes after a mistake last month ruined ingredients for up to 15 million future Johnson & Johnson vaccine doses. The CDC is also looking into a handful of cases of possible severe side effects from the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. Rare blood clots had been found in 6 recent vaccine recipients. The CDC says they are investigating several new cases to determine whether the clotting is actually related to the vaccine. Meanwhile, some states are rolling back COVID restrictions. Overnight, Arizona's governor announced that he's rescinding the state's mask mandate in K-12 schools. And the medical examiner says Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick died of natural causes. Sicknick died after confronting protesters at the Capitol siege on January 6th. The examiner says a series of strokes ultimately caused his death and found no evidence of injury or allergic reaction to a chemical he was sprayed with at the Capitol. But the medical examiner does say all that transpired played a role in his death. The FBI said the spray temporarily blinded Sicknick and 2 other officers. Assault charges will remain for the suspects who have pleaded not guilty. And the fate of Derek Chauvin is now in the hands of the jury. Jurors are now in day 2 of deliberations after deliberating for 4 hours yesterday. Lawyers gave more than 6 hours of closing arguments, with the prosecution arguing there's no reasonable doubt that Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd, while the defense said Chauvin acted as a reasonable police officer. Protesters gathered outside of the courthouse, and officials in Minneapolis and across the country are preparing for more demonstrations as the country braces for a verdict. And I want to go right to Mark Claxton of the Black Law Enforcement Alliance for more on the Chauvin verdict and what it can mean in a larger impact. Mark, thanks for being here. Among some other points yesterday, the prosecutor argued that this is not an anti-police prosecution, but rather, he says, a pro-police prosecution, because he says there's nothing worse for good police than bad police. They also tried to make it clear the police aren't on trial. Derek Chauvin is on trial here. What do you think about that general point, and why was it so important to make?
It's vitally important because oftentimes people have a great difficulty in rendering decisions against police officers because they treat it as if it's an indictment, if you will, against the profession of policing. So I think the prosecutors were mindful of that concern that some jurors may have and wanted to make sure that they isolated Derek Chauvin and indicated that, you know, you have to charge him according to his individual actions in this case, as they have charged him, and you have to judge him accordingly. So it was wise to make sure to reassure the jurors not to conflate policing with the conduct of Derek Chauvin and to treat him individually, isolate him, if you will, and therefore you could then consider some of his actions to be abhorrent or even criminal.
And now, on the other hand, the defense argued that Derek Chauvin was following training and acting as a reasonable police officer would on May 25th. What did you make of those arguments?
Well, the defense is engaged largely in this kind of hypothetical positioning and presentation. So I don't think the evidence submitted in court, that means the evidence of the expert witnesses, supports their position that Derek Chauvin in any way acted proper as far as police tactics are concerned, not according to professional standards, not according to the Chief Arredondo, not even according to their departmental standards. And if you listen to the expert testimony, there was not a single shred of validation for what he engaged in. There was significant conversation about the disproportionate amount of force that was used by Derek Chauvin. I just think the defense is throwing anything they can against the wall and hoping something sticks or causes some confusion.
Now, what do you think this verdict could mean for the larger issue in terms of police and police reform?
I don't think the verdict itself will have significant impact in adjusting downward the calls for reform or reimagination of police. I think that regardless of the verdict, there will be continued calls for us to restructure policing, to refocus policing, to reprioritize policing, reallocate funds. and reimagine policing into the 21st century. I think everyone's kind of at the point where they understand that a requirement of professional standing is that there's a constant upgrade, and not only in training, but a lot of the procedural aspects of it. So I think the verdict, regardless of the verdict, there will continue to be a significant and substantive push towards reform. And you can see many jurisdictions are already engaging in certain components of larger reform packages.
And we know tensions are high in Minneapolis and also around the country as we await a verdict here. What's your message to law enforcement tasked with keeping the peace in all of this?
Do your job. Adhere to the professional standards. Remember, don't personalize it. To remain disciplined and structured, and be a professional. And that really is the message that the community has been sending and yelling and screaming and demanding of law enforcement for many decades now. So it's up to the law enforcement community to either adhere to those professional standards, and unfortunately many of them are just implied because there are no clear national standards. But I think everyone's clear about the responsibility or expectations of law enforcement and policing, and that includes during the course of demonstrations, regardless of how vocal or vociferous or potentially apparently dangerous they are. Just maintain professional standards and do that which protects and preserves and prioritizes human life.
All right, Mark CLAXTON of the Black Law Enforcement Alliance. We appreciate your time as always, Mark. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Appreciate you.
And many Americans are feeling a lot of stress and anxiety as we wait for the verdict in the Derek Chauvin trial. Earlier on GMA, our Robin Roberts talked about how to manage those emotions with psychiatrist Dr. Janet Taylor. Here's that interview.
How do you respond to people who are just so anxious right now?
Well, the anxiety is real, and the facts are our brain does not like uncertainty, but we know a verdict is coming, and we have an opportunity to respond in a way where we stay kind and we stay involved no matter what the verdict is, but we do need to brace ourselves because it's coming.
And so what do you suggest people do to maintain their faith, to keep the faith?
Right. So what you can do is to focus on what you can control and get involved, volunteer, help someone. Advocate for laws that you believe in, and most importantly, vote and register to vote, because that enables a sense of participation and self-efficacy, things that you can do.
So how about if you have children and you might even not know this, they may be going online and following what's going on. They're hearing from their friends, family members who are talking about it. So how do you navigate the situation that we're in right now with your children?
Yeah, be clear. Our children are well aware of what we're going through. So you want to be candid. Talk about the past and present history of race and race relations in this country. Talk about policing and what policing evolved from. Do your homework. But also, we don't want our children afraid of the police. Police are there to help us. Most police are good, and help our kids understand what they can do to stay safe and how we as parents and caregivers protect them.
And the prosecution in the closing arguments especially, they were pointing out this is against this particular former police officer, not against all policing, but that it's not who he was that he's on trial for, it's for what he did. How do we, regardless of what happens, we do not know what the verdict will be. How do we handle it, and how do we move forward as a country, do you think?
Yeah, well, this is a struggle against the system. And Robin, recently, last week, I was at the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, and I would urge every viewer to go there. But it was a reminder of the struggle in America and a reminder of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. His whole presence was, who are we as people and what do we represent? How do we want to be? And this is a time when we can certainly work through this disruption, and through disruption can come calm, can come hope, and come peace. But we need to work through it with a sense that things will be better, knowing that we can be better as humans. And this is about humanity and making the changes that we need to.
Our thanks to Robin and Dr. Janet Taylor for that interview. And Attorney General Merrick Garland spoke to our Pierre Thomas in an ABC News exclusive and his first interview since taking the job. Hear what the Attorney General had to say about police reform, voting rights, and what it's like being blocked from the Supreme Court after the break. Welcome back. Attorney General Merrick Garland sat down with ABC News for his first interview since taking office. He discussed domestic terror, police reform, voting rights, and what it was like being blocked from the Supreme Court. Here's Chief Justice correspondent Pierre Thomas with an extended cut of that exclusive interview.
Morning.
Oh, you're looking very good.
So, Mr. Attorney General, thank you. You were at the Justice Department and helped oversee the investigation of the Oklahoma City bombing.
My name is Merrick Garland. I'm Associate Deputy Attorney General from the Justice Department in Washington.
How does it feel being back today?
I really feel quite a connection to Oklahoma City, I have to say. This is not the first time I've been back. It feels gentler. As the years pass, the wave of emotion becomes somewhat less, but if you were listening to my speech today, you probably saw that I wasn't quite able to hold it together at every moment.
Although many years have passed, the terror perpetrated by people like Timothy McVeigh is still with us.
It means quite a lot to me.
And this is a particularly important moment. You sense that this is a moment where the country needs to pay attention to domestic terrorism. Why?
Yes, I do. I think the FBI reported just last month that violent domestic extremists are a high-level threat to the country. And they can cause the kind of tragedy that happened here. And it's important that the Justice Department put its resources into doing everything we can to stop it from happening, to prosecuting people who do it, and to fighting against the kind of hatred that leads to these kinds of tragedies.
Now, I was looking at some data, and domestic terrorists, particularly white supremacists, have killed more people in this country than internationally based terrorism since 9/11. We saw the brutal massacre at the Mother Emanuel AME Church in South Carolina, the fatal shooting at the Pittsburgh synagogue, the racially and ethnically motivated killing at the Texas Walmart. It feels more urgent now than in recent memory. Do you agree with that assessment?
It does feel urgent, and I also don't want to take our eyes off of the threat of foreign terrorism as well. But I think it's true that there's been a significant uptick. There was a period after Oklahoma City where things seemed to be at a lower level and ebbed, but this is the kind of problem you can never take your eyes off of. And the Justice Department is committed to being sure that we don't do that.
You know, when we looked at some recent events, Governor Whitmer, the threats against her. And during the insurrection, we saw elements of the far-right militia. We saw elements of white supremacists, even Nazi sympathizers. Does it feel like a kind of a sinister deja vu for you? I mean, I remember the Turner Diaries and all these elements at play back when the Oklahoma City bombing happened and the kind of factors that spawned Timothy McVeigh. Does it feel that way to you?
Well, this is a problem that the country has never been able to eliminate. The Justice Department itself was, as I've said before, was founded during Reconstruction to fight against the kind of domestic terrorism that was keeping African Americans from being able to vote during Reconstruction. As I'm sure you know, I also visited Greenwood and Tulsa yesterday.
And we still have damage from that massacre.
And it's a line of the same kind of hatred that killed black Americans and that burned their homes. It's a line through to the kind of domestic violent extremism represented by McVeigh. This is the kind of thing that the Justice Department was built to fight against.
When hundreds of Americans stormed the Capitol, the seat of democracy, threatening to try to kill the vice president, what do you think that was a symptom of?
Look, I can't, because I'm the Attorney General, because we have cases that are pending, I can't talk about anything specific. What I can say is that we put a lot of resources into arresting and the people who committed criminal acts at the Capitol. The work of the assistant U.S. attorneys and the agents on the ground in the District of Columbia is just unbelievable. 400 arrests since the event. People are working day and night to catch the people who committed crimes, and the Justice Department is committed to providing them with the kind of resources that they need to continue that work.
And understanding that you can't talk specifically about the case, a number of the people who have been to court, they've said, we were there because of President Trump. We did this at his behest. They're being held accountable. And I understand there's a difference between civil accountability, criminal accountability, and moral responsibility. And I know you don't spend a lot of time talking about President Trump, but is that a factor, and will the Justice Department investigate every aspect of the case?
Look, again, the Justice Department doesn't comment on individual actors. It doesn't comment at all until it brings, if and when it brings cases. That's regardless of who the person is. The Justice Department will investigate, and we will speak through our pleadings.
Most police, my father-in-law is a retired police officer, taught criminal justice in the state of Pennsylvania. My best friend, one of my best friends, is a FBI agent, former FBI agent. But do you believe there is still pockets of racism and bias within law enforcement, and how widespread do you think it is?
Look, racism is an American problem. I think that it's plain to me that there's has been and remains discrimination against African Americans and other communities of color and other ethnic minorities. I think it's reflected in discrimination in housing, in employment, in the justice system, and in disparate treatment in these ways, and it's led to a lower level of home ownership, lower family incomes, a lesser ability to accumulate wealth. All of these things are still in America. We do not yet have equal justice under law. And as I said, I think this is an important part of the role of the Justice Department to help bring it about.
This is one I wanted to ask you for a long time. The Supreme Court nomination. You were qualified, highly respected in the legal community. How did you feel at that moment when you were blocked, and how did you get over it? How did you move past it?
Well, I appreciate the praise coming from you. Look, I look forward. I now have the opportunity to do some very important things. I have the opportunity now to lead a Justice Department in pursuit of civil rights. I have a chance to lead a Justice Department in pursuit of the rule of law, in ensuring the independence of the department and its independence particularly from any kind of partisan influence in the way we bring investigations or prosecutions. And I have a chance to lead a department sitting here in Oklahoma City that needs to fight against domestic violent extremism so that the kind of tragedy that we had in Oklahoma City doesn't occur. I think that's a wonderful opportunity for myself, and that's the reason I wanted to come back to the Justice Department.
So moving on is moving on.
Moving on is moving on.
And final question. The president has been pretty adamant that some of these new laws, which he views as suppressing voting rights, are what he calls a modern-day version of Jim Crow. Is the Justice Department looking at some of these laws and reviewing them, and do you share some of his concerns?
Again, to go once again to the history of the Justice Department, the work I was describing was work to ensure the ability of black Americans, the newly freed slaves, to vote. That's a through line going from then to the establishment of the Civil Rights Division to what we're doing today. The Justice Department, and particularly its Civil Rights Division, is actively and aggressively concerned about voting rights. I think that we do best in America when we let everybody who's eligible vote. That is the way we ensure a true democracy, and that's the way we ensure a respect for democracy. And the Justice Department will do everything within its authorities to ensure that that is the case.
Our thanks to Pierre Thomas for that interview. And that does it for this ABC News Live update. I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for joining us. And remember, ABC News Live is here for you all day with the latest news, context, and analysis. I'll see you back here at 3 p.m. Eastern with Terry Moran for The Breakdown. Stay safe.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.